I was kneeling on the wet asphalt of a gas station parking lot off Route 9 in Haddonfield, New Jersey, rain soaking through the back of my flannel shirt, hands smeared with road grime when I heard him say it. The man was standing 6 feet behind me just under the edge of the awning, his phone pressed tight against his ear. He thought the rain was loud enough to cover his voice. It wasn't. I heard every word. He whispered, "I found her. He's here. You're not going to believe this, but I found her." My hand stopped turning the lug wrench. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Not because the words were threatening, but because of the way he said them, like he'd been looking for me for a very long time. I didn't turn around. I didn't stand up. I just stared at the flat tire. I was halfway through changing for a man I'd never met, and I thought very calmly, who is looking for me and why? But to understand how we got here, you have to go back to the spring of 2019. Back to the version of me that still believed being useful was the same thing as being loved. My name is Corinne. I was 25 years old that spring, working as a mobile veterinary technician in South Jersey. I drove a white 2012 Ford Transit van with 214,000 miles on it, and I made house calls to farms, small shelters, and elderly pet owners who couldn't get their animals to a clinic. I drew blood, administered vaccines, cleaned wounds, trimmed hooves. I smelled like antiseptic and hay more days than not. I'd been doing that work for 23 years. I built it myself, client by client. After my divorce in 2002 left me with a 9-year-old daughter, a mortgage on a 2-bedroom house in Collingswood, and exactly $4,200 in savings. No family money. No safety net. I made it work because I didn't have the luxury of not making it work. My daughter, Elise, grew up watching me repack the van at 5 in the morning and come home at 8 at night. She saw me eat dinner standing up at the kitchen counter because I was too tired to sit down. She never complained. She just started helping, handing me syringes when she was 12, filing client paperwork by the time she was 15. We were a team. My older brother Martin lived a different kind of life. He was a real estate agent in Cherry Hill who married a woman named Donna whose family owned a small chain of dry cleaners. They had a nice house, nice cars, and a firm belief that their success was entirely self-made. Martin hadn't spoken to me more than a handful of times a year since our mother passed in 2011. When he did call, it was usually to ask me for something. A favor. A signature. Access to a storage unit where I kept Mom's furniture. The pattern was always the same. Martin would need something and he'd frame it like he was doing me a favor by asking, "Corinne, I'm giving you the chance to be involved," he'd say. That was his line. His signature phrase. As if my participation in his plans was a gift he was generously offering. When Mom died, I handled the funeral arrangements alone. Martin showed up 40 minutes late to the service and left before the burial to take a call. When I asked him to split the $6,800 funeral cost, he said he'd look into it. He never did. I paid every cent. When I needed a co-signer for a business loan in 2014 to replace my van's transmission, Martin said he couldn't risk it. But that same year he asked me to co-sign a lease for a commercial property he wanted to flip. I said no. He didn't speak to me for 7 months. "I'm giving you the chance to be involved," he'd said that time too. And I'd thought, involved in what? Your convenience. But I never said that out loud. I just let the silence stretch and eventually he'd circle back like nothing happened. That was our rhythm. His entitlement, my quiet tolerance, and the slow erosion of something that used to be family. By 2019 I had accepted a kind of peace with it. Elise was 27, working as a dental hygienist in Morristown. I had my van, my clients, my small house with the garden out back where I grew tomatoes and basil. I had a good friend named Ruth, a retired large animal vet who lived on a 5-acre plot in Medford, who I visited every Sunday for coffee and unsolicited wisdom. Life was small. Life was mine. I thought the chapter with Martin was closed. Then, on a Tuesday in October, Elise called me at work. I was parked outside a horse farm in Tabernacle, eating a turkey sandwich on the tailgate. "Mom," she said, and her voice had that tight, careful quality that meant she was about to tell me something she didn't want to say. "Uncle Martin called me." I set the sandwich down. "He wants to talk to you about Grandmom's house." My mother's house. A small Cape Cod on Maple Terrace in Haddon Heights. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a screened-in porch that smelled like lavender and old books. After Mom passed, Martin and I had agreed, verbally, never in writing, to keep the house in the family. We'd split the property taxes. I maintained the yard, paid for minor repairs, kept the pipes from freezing every winter. Martin's financial contribution had been, to put it generously, sporadic. What Elise told me next made the sandwich irrelevant. Martin had listed the house for sale. Without telling me. Without asking. He'd contacted a real estate attorney, drawn up paperwork asserting himself as sole executor of our mother's estate, a role that had never been formally assigned because Mom died intestate without a will, and had put the property on the market for $285,000. I drove to Haddon Heights that evening. The sign was already in the yard. A red and white Century 21 sign, planted right next to the rosebush I'd pruned every March for 8 years. I stood on the sidewalk in the dusk, October leaves skittering across the pavement, and I stared at it. I didn't call Martin. I didn't pull the sign out of the ground, even though my hands ached too. I just took a photograph with my phone, got back in my van, and drove home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea that went cold in my hands, and I looked up the New Jersey intestate succession laws. When a parent dies without a will and leaves no surviving spouse, the estate passes equally to the children. Equally. 50-50. Martin had no legal right to sell that house without my consent, and he certainly had no right to claim sole executorship without a court order. He knew that. He was a real estate agent. He understood property law better than most, which meant he hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a choice. 2 days later, Martin called me. Not to apologize. Not to explain. To inform me. Corinne, I've got a buyer interested. Cash offer. I'm giving you the chance to be involved in the closing process if you want, but this is happening either way. There was again. That phrase. Like a key turning in a lock I'd been slowly building for 30 years. Martin, I said. My voice was steady. I'd had 2 days to prepare for this moment. I'm not going to fight with you on the phone. Good, he said. Because there's nothing to fight about. But I am going to ask you to remove the listing. He laughed. Not cruelly exactly. More like the way you'd laugh at a child who says they want to drive the car. Dismissive. Automatic. That's not going to happen, he said. The house is sitting there doing nothing. I need the capital, and frankly you should be thanking me. Your half will be more money than you've probably seen in a long time. I let that land. I let the silence sit there like a stone in a pond. Good night, Martin, I said, and I hung up. The next morning I called Ruth. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I've carried with me every day since. Corinne, some people don't see your kindness as love. They see it as permission. And when you finally stop giving permission, they'll call you the problem. That doesn't make you the problem. I wrote those words on a post-it note and stuck it to my bathroom mirror. Then I called a probate attorney named David Kwan in Haddonfield. His office was on Kings Highway, above a bakery that made the entire stairwell smell like cinnamon rolls. I sat across from him with a folder of documents. Mom's death certificate, property tax receipts in my name, 8 years of maintenance records, photographs of every repair I'd made to the house. David reviewed everything for 40 minutes. Then he looked up and said, "Your brother has no legal standing to sell this property without your agreement. If he's filed as sole executor, he did so fraudulently. We can challenge this in surrogate court, and frankly, it won't be close." He filed a lease pendens on the property that afternoon. A legal notice that put any potential buyer on alert that the title was in dispute. The listing was effectively frozen. Then the calls began. The first call came from Martin 2 days later. His voice was hard, clipped, like a man accustomed to closing deals who'd just been told the deal was off. "What did you do? My buyer's attorney is asking about a lien on the property. Did you put a lien on Mom's house?" "It's a lease pendens," I said calmly. "It's not a lien. It notifies interested parties that there's a legal dispute about ownership." "This is ridiculous, Corinne. You're sabotaging a perfectly good sale because you're being emotional." "I'm not being emotional, Martin. I'm being an equal heir." He hung up. The second call came a week later. His tone had shifted. The confidence was thinner now, stretched over something that sounded like confusion. "My attorney says I need your signature to proceed. He also says the executor filing might have issues. Can we just sit down and talk about this?" "I'd be happy to talk," I said. "Through attorneys." You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. I'm not the one who listed our mother's house without telling her other child, Martin. Silence. Then the click of the line going dead. The third call came 3 weeks after that, and this time Donna was on the line too. Martin's voice was smaller. Donna's was sharp. "Corinne, Martin is under a lot of financial pressure right now," Donna said. "He was counting on this sale. If you cared about family, you'd understand that." "I do care about family," I said. "That's why I've been mowing the lawn and fixing the gutters for 8 years while Martin contributed nothing. I have every receipt." Donna didn't respond to that. Martin mumbled something about working it out, and the call ended. The fourth call came on a Saturday morning in November. It was Martin alone. No Donna. No bluster. His voice sounded like a man who'd been sitting in a quiet room for a long time. "I messed up," he said. Just that. 3 words. I waited. I don't know what I thought. I thought you wouldn't care. Or that you'd just go along with it like you always do. "Like I always do," I repeated softly. Not as an accusation. As a mirror. "Yeah," he said. And his voice broke just slightly at the edges. "I took advantage of that. I know I did." I closed my eyes. Outside my kitchen window, a cardinal was sitting on the fence post. Bright red against the gray November sky. Startling and still. "I don't want to destroy our family over a house, Martin. But I won't be invisible in it either." He didn't say anything for a long time. And then, "What do you want to do?" We agreed through our attorneys to a formal mediation. The house would not be sold without mutual consent. Martin's fraudulent executor filing was withdrawn. David Kwan handled everything with the kind of quiet professionalism that reminded me that decency still had a place in the legal system. The mediator, a retired judge named Patricia Holloway, reviewed the 8 years of maintenance records and ruled that any future sale proceeds would be split 60-40 in my favor, reflecting my disproportionate financial contribution to the property's upkeep. Martin accepted. He didn't argue. I think by that point he was too tired to argue. Or maybe, and I want to believe this, he was too honest. No. The gas station. The rain. The stranger. I need to finish that part. It was a Thursday evening in March of the following year. I'd been on a call in Hamilton, a diabetic cat named Biscuit who needed his insulin adjusted, and I'd stopped for gas at a Sunoco off Route 9. It was pouring. The kind of cold, sideways rain that makes you question every life choice that led you to being outside. I saw the man standing next to a silver Audi with a flat rear tire. He was in his 60s, wearing a wool overcoat that was soaked through, holding his phone and looking at the tire like it had personally betrayed him. He clearly had no idea what to do. I pulled my van alongside. "Need a hand?" I said. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "You know how to change a tire?" "I've changed about 300 of them," I said. Which was true. When your livelihood depends on a van with 214,000 miles, you learn. I got his spare out of the trunk, got the jack positioned, and went to work. Rain hammering the back of my neck. My knees aching on the wet ground. He stood behind me, and that's when I heard him make the call. I found her. When I finished and stood up, wiping my hands on a rag from my van, the man was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. It wasn't menacing. It was something closer to wonder. "My name is Thomas Birch," he said. "I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of Margaret Lewin." I shook my head. The name meant nothing to me. "Margaret was a client of yours. You treated her cats. 2 calicos. You made house calls to her home in Haddonfield for almost 6 years. She passed away in January." I remembered then. Mrs. Lewin. The small brick house on Washington Avenue. The 2 calicos named Dot and Dash. She always had butterscotch candies in a dish by the door and insisted I take a handful before I left. "Mrs. Lewin left specific instructions in her will," Thomas said. "She wanted to leave a bequest to, and I'm quoting here, the kind woman who takes care of my girls and never rushes and always talks to them like they're people." I felt the rain on my face. I couldn't speak. "She left you $22,000, Corinne. We've been trying to find you for 2 months. You're not easy to track down. No website. No social media." I leaned against my van. The rain was letting up just barely. A thin line of gold cracking through the clouds to the west. "She remembered me," I said. That was all I could manage. "She more than remembered you," Thomas said. She told me once that you were the only person who came to her house and made her feel like she wasn't a burden. I drove home that night with the windows cracked despite the damp, breathing in the clean, washed-out smell of the world after rain. I thought about Mrs. Lewin and her butterscotch candies. I thought about Martin and the Century 21 sign in the yard. I thought about my mother's house on Maple Terrace and the rosebush and the screened-in porch. I thought about how the people who see you most clearly are sometimes not the ones who share your blood. That was over 4 years ago now. The house on Maple Terrace is still in the family. Martin and I agreed to rent it to a young couple, a teacher and a paramedic with a baby on the way, at a rate that covers the taxes and keeps the place alive. Martin came out last spring to help me replace the porch screens. We didn't talk much while we worked, but he was there. And he brought sandwiches from the Italian deli on the White Horse Pike, the one with the roasted peppers that Mom used to love. We're not what we were. But we're not nothing either. Elise and I used part of Mrs. Lewin's bequest to adopt a calico from the Camden County shelter. We named her Butterscotch. She sleeps on my pillow and judges me silently, which is exactly what I need. I still drive the van. It's got 247,000 miles on it now and a new rattle near the rear axle that I'm choosing to ignore. I still make house calls. I still kneel on wet ground and cold concrete and barn floors that smell like cedar shavings and manure. And I still change tires when I see someone stranded. Because here's what I've learned, and it's a simple thing, really. The moments that define your life are rarely the ones you plan. They're the ones you stumble into at a gas station in the rain with dirty hands and aching knees, doing something small for someone you don't know. If this story feels familiar to you, if you've been the one who always shows up, always maintains, always fixes, and rarely gets thanked, I want you to hear this. Your quiet work is not invisible. It is seen. Maybe not by the people you wish would see it, but it is seen. And sometimes, when you least expect it, a stranger whispers into his phone and changes your life. Not because you were looking for something, but because you were already being exactly who you are. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I'll be here telling more stories just like this one. Real ones. Quiet ones. The kind that stay with you after the rain stops.